Have you ever been forced to choose between the person you thought would complete your life and the child who is your life? I never thought that question would come for me. Not at 63. Not after everything I had already survived. But it did, and the answer came to me not in daylight, not in a calm moment of reflection. It came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, when I heard something from down the hallway that stopped my heart. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Graham. I live in a small house in Tauranga, close enough to the harbor that on still mornings I can smell the salt in the air before I even open the curtains. I have lived here for 21 years. I raised my son, Callum, in this house. I painted his bedroom walls dark blue when he was 7 because he said it looked like the ocean at night. Those walls are still that color. I never had the heart to change them. Callum's mother, my wife Diane, passed away when Callum was 11 years old. Ovarian cancer. She fought for 14 months, and she never once complained in front of him. She was the bravest person I have ever known. When she was gone, it was just the two of us, a 52-year-old man who didn't know how to cook a proper meal, and a boy who had just lost his mother and was trying to figure out how to keep going. We figured it out together. I want you to understand something about Callum before I go any further. He was not like other children, and I do not say that the way parents sometimes say it, meaning their child is exceptional or gifted. I mean it plainly and honestly. Callum had been diagnosed at age 5 with a condition that affected his processing, his coordination, his ability to read social cues. The doctors used a long clinical name for it. Most people, if they spent an hour with him, would simply notice that he moved through the world a little differently. He spoke slowly and carefully. He sometimes repeated himself. He needed routines to feel safe. He needed to know what was coming next. After Diane died, that he would always have a place here, that I would always be here, and that nothing would ever change that. He looked at me with those pale blue eyes. He has his mother's eyes, and he nodded very seriously, the way he always did when something mattered to him. I kept that promise for 11 years without it ever being tested. Then I met Patricia. It was at a community fundraiser at the Mount Maunganui Surf Club, the kind of evening where people stand around with wine and bid on auction items they don't really need. My neighbor had dragged me along because he said I had become a hermit, and it wasn't healthy for a man my age to only talk to his son and his tomato plants. He wasn't entirely wrong. Patricia was standing near the raffle table. She was 61, recently retired from a long career in school administration, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, and laughing at something her friend had just said. She had a laugh that filled the room without being loud. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just the kind of laugh that made you want to know the joke. We talked for 2 hours that evening. We talked about the harbor, about Tauranga in the old days, about her daughter who lived in Wellington, about my tomatoes. She had grown up in Rotorua and only moved to the Bay of Plenty after her retirement. She had been widowed herself 8 years prior. She understood what it meant to rebuild a life. I drove home that night feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. Something light. Something like possibility. We began seeing each other in the spring. Walks along the waterfront. Long lunches at cafes we'd been meaning to try. Drives out to the Coromandel on weekends when the weather was good. Patricia was warm and easy to be around, and she made me laugh at myself in a way I'd forgotten was possible. For the first time, in over a decade, I felt like something more than just a father and a widower. I felt like a man with a future. I told Callum about her after 2 months. He was 22 at the time and still living at home with me. He worked 4 mornings a week at the garden center on Cameron Road. He loved the plants, loved the order of the place, loved that each thing had its proper name and its proper care. He had been doing it for 3 years, and the owner, a patient woman named Helen, thought the world of him. When I told Callum about Patricia, he asked me 3 questions. Was she kind? Did she make me happy? And was she going to make me stop eating breakfast with him on Saturday mornings? I told him yes, yes, and absolutely not. He nodded in that serious way of his and said, "Okay, Dad. I'm glad for you." That was Callum. The three of us had dinner together for the first time in June, a roast chicken at our kitchen table, which I overcooked slightly because I was nervous. Callum had helped me set the table and had placed a small vase of flowers in the center, which made Patricia smile when she walked in. The evening was a little stilted, the way first meetings always are, but it wasn't unpleasant. Callum was polite and careful. He asked Patricia about her daughter. He showed her the seedling tray he was keeping on the back porch. Patricia smiled at all the right moments. She helped me clear the dishes. When I walked her to her car that evening, she squeezed my hand and said it had been lovely. I believed her. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have seen yet, was that the woman standing in my driveway squeezing my hand was not quite the same woman who would emerge over the following months. Or perhaps she was always the same woman, and I simply hadn't been paying the right kind of attention. The comments started small. That is always how it begins, I think. Small enough that you can explain each one away individually. The first time, we were washing up after Sunday lunch, and Callum came into the kitchen to ask me if we were still going for our usual walk along the waterfront that afternoon. It was our routine, we had done it nearly every Sunday for years. I said of course. And Patricia smiled and said she'd love to come along. Callum looked relieved and went back to his room to get his jacket. When he was out of earshot, Patricia said quietly, "Does he always need that kind of reassurance? About things you do every week?" I told her yes. That routine was important to him, that it helped him feel settled. She made a small sound. Not unkind, exactly. More like thoughtful. The way someone sounds when they are deciding whether to say the next thing out loud. She didn't say it that day, but a month later, when Callum asked me twice in one afternoon whether I had remembered to tell Patricia what time we were having dinner, she said it. "Graham, he's a grown man. He shouldn't need to ask you the same question twice. Have you ever thought about getting him some proper support? Somewhere with people trained to help?" I looked at her. I kept my voice even. I said that Callum had a life here, a job he loved, a routine that worked for him, and that asking questions twice wasn't a problem that needed to be solved. She nodded. But the look on her face said something different. Over the following weeks, I began to notice the shape of it. The way she would fall quiet when Callum joined us in the lounge. The way she would suggest, lightly, that we go out for dinner rather than eat at home. The way she once said, when Callum spilled his orange juice at breakfast and apologized 3 times in a row, "Graham, you really don't need to let him keep saying sorry like that. It's a bit much." A bit much. I said nothing. I cleaned up the juice and I talked to Callum about the garden center, and I told myself it would settle down, that she was still adjusting, that I was reading too much into small things. But then the small things began to get larger. She started referring to Callum's needs as a lot to manage, not cruelly, always in a measured tone, as if she were simply being practical. She began suggesting that perhaps there were better options for someone like him. She mentioned, twice, a residential program she had heard about through a former colleague. The second time she mentioned it, she had printed out a brochure and left it on the kitchen counter. I found it on a Thursday evening when Callum was in his room. I stood in my own kitchen holding that brochure, and I felt something cold move through me. I put it in the recycling bin. I didn't say anything to her about it that night. I didn't trust myself to say the right thing, but something had shifted. I could feel it. The way you can feel a change in the weather before it arrives. In October, Patricia began spending more time at my house. She would bring an overnight bag on Fridays and stay through Sunday. I had thought this was what I wanted. I had thought it felt like progress. But I started to notice that when she was here, Callum became quieter. He stopped coming out of his room as readily in the evenings. He ate dinner with us, but said less. He started double-checking things more, asking me about plans, about schedules, looking for the reassurance that things were still in their proper order. I told myself he was adjusting too. Then came a Sunday in late October that I will not forget. It was a morning like any other. I was making eggs in the kitchen. Patricia was sitting at the table with her tea. Callum came in, a little slowly, still half asleep, and he went to the cupboard to get his cereal. He fumbled with the box. He sometimes did that in the mornings. His coordination was always slower before he was fully awake, and the box caught on the edge of the shelf and knocked his glass off the counter. It didn't break. It just fell and rolled across the tiles with a loud sound. Callum said, Oh, sorry. I'll get it." And Patricia said, not loudly, but clearly enough for both of us to hear, "Every single morning." I turned around from the stove. Callum had gone very still. He was holding the cereal box against his chest and looking at the floor. His face had the particular expression it got when something had hurt him, and he wasn't sure if he was allowed to show it, a kind of careful blankness, as if he were trying to take up less space. I felt something break inside me then. Not loudly, quietly, the way ice cracks from underneath. I asked Callum to go watch the telly for a bit while I finished breakfast. He nodded and left the kitchen without a word. Then I turned to Patricia. I asked her what she had meant by that. She said she hadn't meant anything. She was just tired. It had come out wrong. I told her it hadn't sounded like it came out wrong. I told her it had sounded like exactly what she meant. She put down her tea. She said she was sorry, and with her, there was always a but. She said she needed to be honest with me. She said that she cared about me deeply. She said she could see a future with me. She said she wanted to grow old with someone, and that she believed that someone could be me. But she also said that she had not expected this to be so, and she paused, choosing the word carefully, so consuming. She said that Callum needed more than a father and a routine. She said that I was doing him no favors by keeping him so close. She said that perhaps it was time for me to think about what I needed too. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When she had finished, I was quiet for a moment. Then I told her that what I needed was for the person sharing my home to treat my son with basic respect. That Callum was not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. That he was a man who worked and lived and contributed and loved in his own way. And that he had been in this house long before she had, and that the sound of a glass rolling across a kitchen floor was not an inconvenience. It was just a Tuesday morning. Patricia looked at me for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, that she thought I needed to decide what I wanted my life to look like. I told her I already knew. She left that afternoon. She didn't take everything. There were still a few of her things at my place. A cardigan over the chair, some books on the side table, but she left. And the house went quiet, in a way that felt, in spite of everything, like a breath let out after holding it too long. I made Callum his favorite that evening, sausages and mashed potato with peas, the meal Diane used to make on Friday nights. We sat at the kitchen table and ate together, and I told him that Patricia would not be coming around anymore. He didn't ask why. He just nodded and ate his peas one at a time, the way he always had since he was small. Before he went to bed, he stopped in the doorway to the lounge and said, "Dad, are you all right?" I told him I was. I told him some things just didn't work out, and that was okay. He stood there a moment longer. Then he said, "I'm glad you're still here. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and turned things over in my mind. The good months with Patricia, the conversations I had explained away, the brochure in the recycling bin, the look on Callum's face when she'd said every single morning, I thought about loneliness, and whether I had been so afraid of it that I had stopped paying close enough attention to what was in front of me. And then, at about 11:30, I heard something from down the hallway. It was a sound I hadn't heard since Callum was a boy. Small, quiet, unmistakable. He was crying. Not loudly. He never cried loudly, even as a child. Just a soft, restrained sound from behind his closed door. The kind that tells you the person making it has been trying very hard not to be heard. I sat up. I put my feet on the floor. I sat there in the dark for a moment, and I understood, with a clarity that only comes at night when everything else is stripped away, exactly how close I had come to letting something irreplaceable be slowly, quietly dismantled. Not in a single dramatic moment, just in small comments and printed brochures, and the suggestion that a man who spills his cereal in the mornings might be better off somewhere else. I got up. I went down the hall. I knocked on Callum's door. He went quiet when he heard me. Then he said, "Come in." I opened the door. He was sitting up in bed, the ocean blue walls around him, a book open in his lap that he clearly hadn't been reading. His eyes were red. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I said, "I heard you, mate." He nodded. He looked at his book. He said, "I didn't want you to be lonely. Because of me. I cannot tell you what those words did to me. If you are a parent, perhaps you already know." I told him that he had never, not for a single day of his life, been the reason for anything bad that had happened to me. I told him that losing his mother had made me lonely, that the years before I met Patricia had sometimes been hard, but that he, Callum, my son, this man sitting in his blue-walled room at 22 years old, had never once been a burden. He had been the reason I got out of bed, the reason I kept the house, the reason I learned to cook badly and kept trying until I got better, the reason I still walked along the waterfront every Sunday, because it was our thing, and our things mattered. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "She didn't like me very much, did she?" It wasn't really a question. I told him that some people weren't able to understand what they didn't have experience with, and that said something about them, not about him. He thought about that. Then he nodded. The slow, serious nod. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Dad." I stayed until he fell asleep. I sat in the chair by the window, the same chair I had sat in when he was small and had bad dreams, and I watched the dark outside, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. More like alignment. Like I had remembered what I was for. That was 2 years ago. In the time since, quite a lot has changed. And I want to tell you about it, because this is not a sad story. It never really was, even when it felt that way. About 8 months after Patricia left, Callum came to me with an idea. He had been talking with Helen at the garden center, and she had mentioned that there was a small commercial space available nearby, and that she had always thought he had an instinct for arrangement, for knowing what looked right next to what colors worked together, what a space needed. She had suggested, gently, that he might think about doing something with that. Callum came to me and said he wanted to try running a small plant and flower stall. He had thought about it carefully. He had a notebook where he had written down costs and ideas in his neat, deliberate handwriting. He asked me if I thought it was a good idea. I told him I thought it was an excellent idea. We spent 3 weekends building a timber cart together in the backyard, long, satisfying days with sawdust on our clothes and the radio on, and Callum checking the measurements twice, 3 times, because he liked to be sure. We painted it white with green lettering. He named it himself, Callum's Greens. He has been running it for 14 months now, every Saturday and Sunday morning at the Tauranga farmers market. He knows every plant by name. He knows which ones do well in salt air and which ones need shade. He talks to his customers quietly and carefully, and they come back every week because he remembers what they bought last time and asks how it went. 3 Saturdays ago, an older woman stopped at his cart and told him that the little fern he had sold her 6 weeks earlier was thriving on her kitchen windowsill, and that it was the first plant she had ever kept alive, and that it had made her happy every morning. Callum smiled the full, real smile he saves for when something genuinely pleases him, and he said, "That's all they need. Just the right light and a bit of water. They're tougher than they look." I was standing a few meters away, and I heard every word. And I had to look at the harbor for a moment, because I didn't want to be the old man crying at the farmer's market. I am telling you this story, wherever you are watching from, because I think about it often. I think about how easy it is to let the voice of practicality drown out the voice of love. How easy it is, especially when you are lonely, to reframe the people you are responsible for as complications, obstacles, things to be sorted out, rather than the whole point. I think about the brochure in the recycling bin. I think about what would have happened if I had read it more carefully. If I had let the slow accumulation of small comments reshape the way I saw my own son. I was 63 years old, and I nearly made a very old kind of mistake. The kind that dresses itself up as reason and maturity and thinking about your own needs for once. The kind that only reveals itself for what it is at 11:30, when you hear your grown son crying quietly behind his bedroom door. Here is what I have learned, or perhaps what I have relearned, because I think I always knew it and simply needed to be reminded. A person's value is not measured by how convenient they are to live with. The people who move through the world differently, more slowly, more carefully, with more questions and more repetition and more need for reassurance, are not lesser for it. They are often, in my experience, the ones paying the closest attention. The ones who notice when the fern needs water. The ones who remember that it matters. A home is not just a building. It is the accumulation of the small things, the Saturday morning breakfasts, the Sunday walks, the blue walls that stay blue because the person who chose that color is still sleeping behind them. When someone asks you to dismantle those things in the name of a future that doesn't include the people who made your present worth having, that is not love, that is renovation. And some things should not be renovated. And to anyone watching who is in the middle of what I was in the middle of, who can feel, slowly and quietly, the person beside them reshaping the way you see someone you love. I want you to pay attention to the small things, not the big confrontations, not the dramatic moments. The small things, the tone of voice when you're not in the room, the brochure left on the counter, the comment about every single morning. Your instincts are telling you something. Don't wait until 11:30 to listen. To my son, Callum, who will probably never watch this because he prefers podcasts about native plants and thinks his dad talking to a camera is a bit embarrassing. Thank you for asking if I was all right that evening. Thank you for the serious nod. Thank you for being exactly who you are. In this house, in this life, without apology. And to whoever is watching from wherever you are right now, I would love to know where you are and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. We are all, it turns out, up later than we planned, listening for something in the dark. That is what connects us. Tell me where you're watching from.